Hello everyone and welcome back once again. In our today's video we will learn on the ancient civilizations of the world. Very shortly we will try to complete this topic in a very short period of time. When we talk about the ancient civilization of the world, we have the four most important ancient civilizations of the world. First of all, we have the Indus Valley civilization, or we call it as a Harappan civilization, which flourished in the Indian subcontinent. And then we have the Mesopotamian civilization, which flourished in the Iraq, and we have the Egyptian civilization that flourished in the river Nile of Egypt, and lastly we have the Chinese civilization. So these are the four most important ancient civilizations of the world which we will be talking about in our class today. Now, what most interesting part about all these four ancient civilization is that there is one common thing. There is one common thing in all these four ancient civilizations, and the common thing is that all these civilization flourished or existed in the river valley or in the fertile plains, and therefore all these civilizations are dearly called as the river valley civilization. So the most common thing that we see in all these civilizations, irrespective of the geographical locations in which they have flourished in the different regions, the most common thing that we see in all these civilizations, like I have mentioned earlier, is that they all flourished in a river valley, and therefore all these four civilizations are also called as a river valley civilization. In our today's class, we will just try to have a look on the geographical locations of all these four ancient civilizations, and also try to understand the river system in which the civilization have taken place. Like I have mentioned earlier, as you can see on the world map here, first of all we have a Mesopotamian civilization, which is in Iraq, on the western part of Indian subcontinent in Iraq itself. Then we have the Egyptian civilization, which will be in the northern part of the African continent here. And then we have, on the eastern side, we have the Chinese civilization that flourished in the Chinese region out there on the eastern part of the map. And then we have the Indus Valley civilization that flourished on the Indian subcontinent, joining or bordering with Pakistan of today. So this is all about the geographical indications or the geographical locations of all these four ancient civilizations of the world. Now let us try to understand particularly on all these particular civilization and different types of rivers that flourished in this civilization. First of all, let's try to understand the Mesopotamian civilization here. Now, when we talk about the Mesopotamian civilization, there are two rivers in which the Mesopotamian civilization flourished. First of all, we have on the left hand side we have a river Euphrates, or it is pronounced as Euphrates, and on the eastern side we have the river Tigris. So Mesopotamia, literally it means between two rivers, in a sense that the civilization or the society or the civilization that flourished in between this river Euphrates and river Tigris of the Iraq is known as the Mesopotamian civilization. And you see here that the river Tigris and Euphrates, both these rivers flow down to the Red Sea in the eastern side of this Arabian peninsula here. So this is all about the Mesopotamian civilization. All we need to remember here is the two important rivers here, the river Tigris on the eastern side and river Euphrates on the western side, and the civilization that flourished in between this river Tigris and Euphrates is called Mesopotamian civilization, because Mesopotamia itself literally means between two rivers. Now let's have a look on the Egyptian civilization here. If we look at the map here, we will see like that of a Mesopotamian civilization. We also have two most important river here. On the right hand side we have a Blue Nile, and on the central and on the western side we have a White Nile. So we will see this White Nile and Blue Nile meets at a point called Groudon, and in which this river will flow up on the northern part of the African continent and flow on the Mediterranean Sea. So like that of Mesopotamian civilization, in the Egyptian civilization all we need to remember is the two rivers that have a tributaries that forming the river Nile. and meeting at the Crodom. We have a Blue Nile on the eastern side, and then from the western central part of Africa we have a White Nile river system that meets at the Crodom and flow on the northern part of African continent and till the Mediterranean Sea. So these are the two most important rivers which we need to remember when we talk about the Egyptian civilization. And we know that this river Nile is one of the longest river in the world. Now let's have a look on the other side of the map on the Chinese civilization. We have again two most important river here. Now the first river we'll be talking about in the map is the Yangtze River, which will be on the southern part of China, Chinese civilization, and on the northern part we have the the Wangxi River. This is pronounced as Wangxi River according to the Chinese pronunciation, or it is also commonly known as a Yellow River. So the Chinese civilization, as you can see here, is a civilization that existed or the flourished between this Yangtze River and the Yellow River or Wangxi River. Most probably the civilization flourished on the river bank of this Yellow River. That's all about the Chinese civilization. We need to remember about the Yellow River or the Wangxi River on the northern side, and then the Yangtze River on the southern part of Chinese civilization. Then lastly we have the most important and the interesting topic here. We have the Indus Valley civilization that flourished in the Indian subcontinent, bordering with that of Pakistan and India of modern today. So you can see here, this is the river flow, the flowing river of the river Indus that has originated on the the northeastern part of Indian Himalayan regions here, and then flow down to the Arabian Sea here. Now most of the locations or most of the geographical locations of the Indus Valley civilization is already now in Pakistan after the partition of India into Pakistan and India in 1947. So no, this river system, as you can see here in the Indus Valley river civilization, it is known as Indus Valley civilization because the civilization flourished in the river Indus itself. So if we see all these the civilization of the world, like I've mentioned earlier, we have one common thing in all the civilization, that is all the civilization flourished in the river valley regions, and that is the reason, the fact that we call all the civilization as a river valley civilization. Before we wind up, let us try to have a recap on what we have studied in our class or in our session today. First of all, we have a Mesopotamian civilization. We have two rivers to remember when we talk about Mesopotamian civilization, that is in Iraq. We have a river Tigris and river Euphrates on the western side, and then river Tigris on the eastern side respectively. Then we have the Egyptian civilization, which will be in the African continent. Here we have two most important river here, the Blue Nile that goes and joins with the White Nile from the central Africa, and both this Blue Nile and White Nile meets at a point called Crodom, and it flows down to the Mediterranean Sea, making this river Nile as one of the longest river in the world. On the other side of the map, on the eastern side, we have the Chinese civilization. Like I've mentioned earlier, the two most important river systems that forms the Chinese civilization is the Yangtze River on the southern part of civilization, and on the northern part we have the Wangxi River, or the commonly known as the Yellow River. So most probably the civilization that flourished in the Chinese region is between the Yangtze River and the Wangxi River. And importantly, we need to remember that most of the civilization took place in the river valleys of Yellow River in the Chinese region. Then lastly, we have the Indus Valley civilization, and like I've mentioned earlier, we have seen the origin of the Indus River from the northeastern regions of the Himalayan mountain range of India, that flow down to the Pakistan and ends up at the Arabian Sea. So if you see the locations of this Indus Valley civilization today in the modern political map, most of the locations will be in the Pakistan side of the Pakistan geographical side because of the partition of India in 1947. So with this, we will wind up our session for today. All we need to understand here is about the four most important river valley civilization, that is the Mesopotamian civilization in Iraq, Indus Valley civilization in the Indian subcontinent here, and the Chinese civilization in China, and the Egyptian civilization in the river Nile. The most common thing we all see in all this civilization is that all this civilization flourished in the river valley, which we call them as a river valley civilization. So with this, we'll wind up our session for today. In our next session, we'll try to emphasize particularly on the Mesopotamian civilization and the Indus Valley civilization in a very particular, detailed analysis way. Well, thank you so much for joining my session, and I hope to see you in my next video. Thank you so much, and have a nice day.